Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. Okay, this week's episode is going to be a bit of an experiment. I have been trying to figure out how to do this for some time, and I never came up with any good answers, so I'm just going to give it a shot. This is also coming out quite late in the week, so I think what I may do is I think I may make this a double episode and just go ahead and put both parts on the main feed just this go round. I think. I'm not sure. I got a number of poems. I'm not going to be able to get to all of the poems sent in, but I want to get to at least to a few of them. I think there were some really interesting examples. And just, I think there should be plenty to talk about. I was talking to Alice earlier tonight on the phone, and this is not a workshop. It's a workshop, it was like a round robin where lots of people from the class all give their opinions. I'm not going to offer that. I'm also not offering a close reading. I'm not going to try to interpret the secret meaning of these poems. It is something more similar to what Ryan and I do with each other's work, or what I will do with my own work, which is really just to try to come back at it with a stranger's eyes and identify where I have one kind of response and where I have another. The spots where I might say, I should say for those of you who are not already familiar, I invited listener poems, and a lot of you were brave and generous enough to send in poems. I'm going to go through them anonymously. I'm going to assign each one a letter, sometimes based on a part of the name, not consistently, and not consistently, only one first or last part of the name, but letters just to have something to refer to. I'm going to go through. I'm not going to include the text of the poems in the show notes. So I think truly by any reasonable standard, you should be able to still publish these where you're able. But I thought this could be interesting, and I'm going to basically try to go through and say, hey, here's how I respond to this particular moment. Here's, whether it's a technical choice or a piece of diction or whatever it is, I'm just going to try to identify the ways in which I might respond to one moment or another, the same way I do with my own poems. So typically, I think I've mentioned this on the show and elsewhere before, but just for context, the way I tend to treat my own poetry specifically, and I do mostly write prose these days, but when I write poems, I write either one of a set of poems. I pick a given form, sonnets, say, or dramatic monologues, or a nonce form that I come up with, and then I will write 30 poems in that form as quickly as I can. It never ends up being 30 days, but as quickly as I can. Sometimes it takes much, much longer than that. And then once I've got all 30 of them, I stop and I just leave them. I think of them as like kimchi. I just bury them in the hill and I wait until I've really, really, as much as possible, forgotten about them. I do the same thing with the ladies I write with once a week. I will write a poem with them based on a prompt one of us comes up with, and then I just do that in sets of 30 as well. And then once I get to another, the end of a set of 30, I break it off, put it in a file, and I start a new one. And then, months, sometimes many months, sometimes almost a year later, I'll come back to one of those sets of 30, go through it, and try to pull out what seems like it's still interesting to me. The first cut I'll usually get rid of half of them just on a first read. And then I will go through a few more cuts, and let's see, I can actually pull up and tell you of the last several sets of poems I've done, these 30. Let's see what stuck around and what didn't. Okay. So the first set of 30 I did with the ladies, I kept 5 of those, which I published. The second set I kept, so 5. I've published 5, or one of them is one of them is not yet published, but it is. I have 6 here, but this one I think I haven't published anywhere, and now that I see that I've marked it, I actually don't. I'm not fun. I tried to mess with it for a while because I felt like it was promising, but not enough. So 5 from this, one of which was never published in a magazine, but it will be in my chapbook. The next set from the ladies. Oh, I have not. So I'm still winnowing this one. So right now I've cut it down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And of those I've published 2. And I'm working on the other 4, and we'll see what happens with them. And then of the odes in here, I call them odes just because they're like my sets of 30. Yeah, of one set of 30 is my third set overall. The first 2 went into the last book. This set I kept 2 out of 30. And the next one I'm working on. Like halfway through that. Oh no, I'm more than halfway through that one now. So we'll see. Usually like if I keep 5 out of 30, that's good. My point though is that my response 5 out of every 6 poems is to say nobody will ever read this. Like when I look at my own work, 5 out of 6 times I will say this is not worth anybody seeing. Nobody, except for me. I will not send it to anybody. Except Ryan sometimes will see a slightly larger culling. So keep that in mind. I am going to take on the poems that listeners sent in with that same frame of mind. So I definitely don't want to, I'm not roasting anybody. I'm not trying to make fun of anybody, but I will just speak very frankly because as I said on an earlier episode, that's something people often ask for in the poetry world, and it is something it is very hard to tell when they actually want it. So I am going to offer it here, and we'll see what happens. Maybe you'll all stop listening after this. Very quickly, though, I did want to give a quick congratulations to Chris Childers, who recently won the Frost Farm Poetry Prize. What do they call it? The 2025 Frost Farm Prize for Metrical Poetry. So he won the first place, and then there were 5 honorable mentions. All of these were chosen by Marianne Corbett. One was Chris won first place and an honorable mention. Come on, Chris, you're getting greedy now. But then 2 of the other honorable mentions, one was to Sally Thomas, one was to Alice Allen. I don't know Allison Talbot or Marianne Osborne, who are the other 2, but Alice, obviously, I know, and Sally, we've crossed paths here and there. But congrats to everybody. That's wonderful. And I did not know until Zena very helpfully wrote to tell me that the Frost Farm is a conference. I mean, it's a place, Robert Frost's farm, but there's actually a conference there, which I did not understand. I'm giving a reading there in September this year, just as part of the reading series, but they have a conference in August, and in addition to, let's see, so Chris will be there. I don't know who the poet in residence is. That I don't know if that's Chris or if that's Ernie was the poet in residence maybe last year. But of the instructors, Meredith Bergman, I've also crossed paths with Brian Berger, guest and friend of the show, Alfred Nicole, friend of the show. And Elijah is going to be teaching a class there. So is Angela Alamo O'Donnell, whom I don't know, but of whom people have many good things to say. But so if you feel like going to New Hampshire in August, which seems like probably the time to go to New Hampshire if you're going to choose one, that or whenever the leaves turn, go check out the Frost Farm Conference. I will put a link in the show notes. Congrats again to Chris, Alice, Sally, and Godspeed to Elijah and Brian and everybody else. Should be a good time. I'm not going to be there because I will be there the following month. But yeah, I'm just glad to know it's a conference. I don't know what I thought it was, but I did not know it was this. So go check that out. I will put a link in the show notes. Although I have to say the photo on the instructor page is a photograph of Pete. It says the caption is Conference Sonnet Class Under the Maple Tree on the Frost Grounds. Oh, class outside. Oh man, sorry that you can't. You've lost me. You lost me there, Frost Farm. Class outside is the worst. We've established that on this podcast. No more class outside. All right, enough of that. I will get to your poems. So I think I have a decent order for the ones I know I want to talk about. We'll see how many I'm able to get to, and at some point I may break this episode in twain. Yeah, so let's start with this one. This is by T, the letter I'm assigning. This is called School Drop-Off. So I think what I will do is just read straight through the poems, or each poem individually. I'll read through the poem, and then I will go back through it line by line and just talk about what I observe. And my authority here is only as much as you offer, only as much as you assign me, right? So there are plenty of people who would certainly disagree with me, and there's no reason to trust me over them. But here is School Drop-Off by T. Their hair and clothes have changed, but kids through time are much the same. Here's one who's deep in thought. Here's one who's cold. Here's one who's lost. They climb the shoveled hill. Here's one who slips but doesn't fall. Here's one who, like a foal, becomes so still when there's a sound he doesn't know the source of. Here's one with just one glove. The other somewhere on the ground. Or home, where I will go soon after. He I call my own regains his footing on the stairs and doesn't look back once. So when I read my own poems, like when I'm reviewing my own work that I've done a draft of, I have a couple different. I try to have a couple different gauges running. Right, one is a gauge that just measures sort of like technical, metrical, prosodic grace. One is a gauge that measures the convincing naturalness of the speech. Again, this does not mean it is a crude demotic, as Robert Bly insisted we all exercise. It just means that the degree to which the speech feels like credible speech. And then there's sort of a larger, blunter gauge that just measures like what is the ultimate effect of the poem? How deep does it cut? So I'll go through this poem, but those are maybe kind of the three main standards I have in mind. And the way I assess my own poems basically is if the meter seems graceful enough, and if there are particular infelicities, if they seem manageable, if it seems like I can address them, and the voice seems credible enough and winning and grossing enough, and if there are places where it falters, they seem like I can find a way to work with them, and the overall impact of the poem, the emotional weight of it, is great enough, then I will work on it some more. And there's a little bit of, like sometimes if a poem hits really hard at the end, I will be willing to take on a greater burden when it comes to like metrical infelicity, or a greater burden when it comes to the trouble with the voice. I mean, the voice has got to be, it's tough if the voice is really not there. It's tough to know what to do. But like there's the poem, basically like the poem has to give me enough reason to show that it's worth developing. Because what I would say happens not infrequently is that I will complete a poem that has where the meter and the rhyme feel like they are tidy, plenty tidy, unobjectionably neat, and not boringly neat, but like they function well enough, and the voice seems coherent and credible enough. But the overall weight of it is just sort of puny. It just doesn't strike with much force. And those are the poems, that's most poems I just set to the side. I just say, okay, well, it was good to go ahead and do a draft of that, but there's no real point in making somebody else read it. That is the concern I immediately have for this poem. I do have some questions about the metrical grace and the voice, but my larger question is a little bit of a so what. Like, okay, you drop the kids off at school, you observe the different kinds of kids. Kids are different over, the times change. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And then there's a little bit of a moment where your own kid you're watching him very closely and with great love and attention, and he's sort of already moved on and isn't paying attention to you, which is the thing that happens constantly with like every single morning, my older daughter and I will wave to my younger daughter, her little sister, and say, "I love you, Ellie. We love you. Have a good day." And Ellie will just walk on the bus and not look back, like not even acknowledge that either of us is saying anything to her. So this is a very familiar experience. And, what is certainly not the case is that I don't, unlike Elijah, I don't necessarily need to hear new wisdom. I don't necessarily need to hear like a great philosophical insight. And I don't want to simplify his position, but like I actually think it's fine to express again a very familiar sentiment. The more things change, the more they stay the same. But it shouldn't feel like a familiar sentiment when we are being reminded of it. And I think here it does feel a little bit like a familiar sentiment. It feels a little bit like, yes, I've heard this and it's true enough, but I've heard it plenty, and there doesn't seem to be very much here that really, it hasn't been made new. It doesn't need to be new, but it should be made new. Their hair and clothes have changed, but kids through time are much the same. And I think that is like the more things change, the more they say the same. It sounds really similar already to that familiar saying. So that I'm not sure what we're getting out of that opening volley. I also, for whatever it's worth, I find my own just formally, I find myself I tend to be a little bit dissatisfied with mere assonance on the page. I think assonance works really well in song and in spoken word poetry because the vowels make the biggest impression on our ears when we hear song lyrics. Song lyrics very often are assonant rhyme. I mean, in fact, a rhyme in a song that does not have assonance, it seems like it's either assonant rhyme or it's true rhyme. But like consonant rhyme doesn't work very well in a song. If you just match the consonant sounds, but you don't match the vowel sound, right? Assonance is laugh and claps was the example I gave of an unhappy assonant rhyme. That would work perfectly well in a song. It would work perfectly well in a spoken word poem. Raisin and reason would not. Raisin and reason, that's a wonderful consonant rhyme that works beautifully on the page. It doesn't work very well in a song. One of the reasons that snooty patooty poets like me tend to like consonant rhymes on the page is because a lot of the poems we love that are very old now have consonant rhymes when, of course, originally they had true rhymes. So if you read, I'm reading some Ben Jonson right now, reading through his poems, many of the rhymes, the vowel sounds don't match. The consonant sounds match, but the vowel sounds don't. Now, presumably, at the time, they did. These were true rhymes. They're not true rhymes anymore. Again, I think that is part of the reason that sort of in a very fusty way, it has just become sort of conventional among a certain stripe of formal poet to heavily prefer consonant rhyme to assonant rhyme. I will cop to that being a personal preference. It's just a pretty strong personal preference. So take that as you will. Plenty of people disagree. But my philosophy tends to be on the page, consonants or true rhyme. In the ear, assonance or true rhyme. All right, assonance, of course, is the vowel sound matching. So we start with some assonant rhyme. And it's distant enough assonant rhyme that it's also a little bit unclear. There's I can't remember who used the construction metrical contract. Was that Brad Lighthouser? I just interviewed Brad Lighthouser. I'm going to put out a conversation I had with him, in the next few weeks. Great conversation, fascinating to talk to him. I want to say he may have been the guy who could that possibly be true? That he was the one who first used contract in the context of meter, and I'm not going to look it up now. But the implication is that when the poet starts a poem, he's informing the reader what to expect. Same thing happens in a song. Same thing happens in a speech. Really, I mean, almost any kind of communication. You are letting the audience know what the rules are, so he can know how to respond to what you're going to say. And so a difficulty, I think, when you start a poem with a very distant assonant rhyme, with two assonant rhymes, the first one even more distant than the second, so changed, same, and thought, lost. Two assonant rhymes, both fairly distant. The trouble is that the reader may very well not know what kind of contract he's being asked to agree to. It's not clear. Is this a poem that's in rhyming couplets, or is this just do we just sort of happen to have some rhymey sounds kind of close together? And the truth is the poem can't quite make up its mind, right? Because we have changed same, thought lost, followed by hill fall, followed by full. So hill fall is loose consonants, fall full is strict consonants, right? It's not just the terminal consonant sound, it's the consonant sound both before and after the final stressed syllable. So changed, same, thought lost, hill, fall, full, sound, source of, glove. So source of and glove is what's sometimes called a wrenched rhyme, because the consonant and vowel sounds are true. Of and glove, that's a true rhyme. But because of the way the line is built, the stress falls on source. So source of is meant to rhyme with glove. He doesn't know the source of. Here's one with just one glove. So changed, same, thought lost, hill, fall, full, sound, source of, glove, ground. So ground picks up the earlier rhyme sound. And then the last three lines are after, footing, and once, which, at least to my eye and ear, don't rhyme with any of the previous lines. So again, when people talk about formal poetry, they often use terms like, well, what are you what are the rules? You're trying to impose rules on me. What are you allowed? You don't think I'm not allowed to do? Where's like you're allowed to do? I don't know what voice I'm doing. I don't know what, like, you're allowed to do whatever you want. You're allowed to do whatever you want in a poem. But choices have effects on the reader, right? So when you set up a contract with the reader and then you don't fulfill it, again, you're allowed to do that. But the question is that a sort of a jarring, shocking, interesting violation of the contract? Or is it just a sort of a disappointment? Is it just sort of a confusion? And I think here we have a little bit of confusion and a little bit of disappointment with the metrical contract, or the rhyming contract. Here's one who's deep in thought. Here's one who's cold. Here's one who's lost. They climb the shoveled hill. That line I like. And I think I like it partly because it follows the beginning of the assonance. Here's one who's deep in thought. Here's one who's cold. Here's one who's lost. And it could be could be the beginning of a long list, right? And then we get this entirely different syntax in a self-contained sentence, a line that is its own sentence. They climb the shoveled hill. It's just a very active, crisp sentence. Yeah, I don't know. I really like that. They climb the shoveled hill. A little bit disappointing that we then continue the anaphoric list, right? Here's one who slips but doesn't fall. Here's one who, like a foal, becomes so still when there's a sound he doesn't know the source of. Here's one with just one glove. That is a kind of a nice image. Here's one with just one glove. I kind of like as a little, if you're going to come up with, was the Larkin bit in the Dyer's Hand, he basically says, not in so many words, that if you don't like lists, you don't like poetry. You have to embrace list making. And I agree. I love making lists. The question though is, if you're going to make a list, you better find some interesting items to fill that list with. Here's one with just one glove. If you're gonna, it's like almost feels like an Edward Gorey poem listing ways different little children died. So that's kind of a nice little detail. The other somewhere on the ground. A little bit of ambiguity there, right? Here's one with just one glove. The other somewhere on the ground. The other glove? The other boy. Ground picking up sound, which presumably is sort of an echo of the distant lost glove. They're not paired. They're far apart, like the rhyme is far apart. Okay, sure. But again, if that were the one violation in the rhyme scheme, it would be one thing, but it's sort of one of several mushinesses and violations. The other somewhere on the ground or home. That's like a precision of construction thing. Here's one with just one glove. The other somewhere on the ground or home. So would you say the other home? I think you say the other at home, right? So just, again, it's clear enough what is meant, but the more we have to do a little bit of mental jogging to make the lines match up, the more the effect is lost. I think of this a little bit the way like engineers think about insulation, right? Like there's no such thing as perfect insulation. There's no such thing as a perfectly efficient machine, right? Every machine loses heat, loses energy. But the question is it possible to retain as much energy as you can, right? And so, people will sometimes complain like, oh, well, why are you being so picky or so sniffy about little imprecisions in grammar or in parallelism or in construction? And my answer is that there are little inefficiencies in the machine. And if the goal of the machine is to produce the maximum emotional effect on the reader, which of course plenty of other poets would say that is not the point. But if the goal is to produce the maximum emotional effect, then you don't want to lose a bunch of heat through imprecise grammar, right? The tighter the construction, the less the reader has to go, wait, at home. Okay. The less the reader has to do those little tangential adjustments along the way, those little pit stops to fix things, the more the reader's going to be struck by the final force of the poem. That's the way I think of it. Just tightening up those inefficiencies, trapping some of that escaping heat. Here's one with just one glove, the other somewhere on the ground, or home where I will go soon after. So I will presumably go home. But again, there's a slight ambiguity there. Here's one with just one glove, the other somewhere on the ground, or home where I will go soon after. Presumably the I will go to, I do kind of enjoy the delayed I, right? Like we're seeing a scene described and it's only at the end that we kind of get the speaker confesses his own presence here. It's not a big shock. I don't think it has like a huge impact, but it is a kind of a nice trick to use rhetorically. Like when Borges at the end of his, toward the end of it, the Aleph, when he says, I saw your face. We get that little inclusion of the reader for a moment. So we get that little acknowledgement that the speaker is a person in this scene. But there's also this sort of ambiguous suggestion that like home where I will go, like you're going to go to your home though, not the kid's home, right? Right? Unless this is his own kid. Although the next line then kind of complicates that. Where I will go soon after he I call my own regains his footing on the stairs and doesn't look back once. So if the kid with the one glove is his own kid and it's his home that he'll be going back to, then subsequently introducing his own kid by saying he I call my own, where I will go soon after he I call my own regains his footing on the stairs. Here's one who slips but doesn't fall. So this suggests that it's that one. The one who slips but doesn't fall is the one who is his own kid. So yeah, there's just a little sort of like unhelpful ambiguity about like whose home he's going back to. And then the other ambiguity, which is not fruitless, because again, ambiguity can be really helpful in a poem. You can get some real powerful mileage out of it. The dumb example I frequently use is, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, line break, which alters when it alteration finds. It's a little expression of doubt at the beginning of that poem about the authenticity of love that is then resolved after the line break, but still lingers in the air. Because of course that is the sentiment of that poem is sort of a faith in love held in tension with a despair at love. So ambiguity can be helpful, except where it's confusing. And here, I think that the darker, more kind of intriguing ambiguity, here's one with just one glove, the other somewhere on the ground. The glove, presumably it's the glove that's on the ground, but the suggestion is that there's a boy who's on the ground. Now, if it's just a boy who fell on the ground because it's slippery, okay, fine. If it's a boy who's lost, like I think if there's a deadly Seamus Heaney poem called School Break. What is it called? I'm going to try to find it. Midterm Break. Okay, yeah, here it is. It's pretty short. I'll read it. He's talking about his son. It's not his son, his brother. He's talking, being a boy, he's talking about his little brother. I sat all morning in the college sick bay, counting bells, knelling classes to a close. At 2:00, our neighbors drove me home. We don't know why he's being, taken home. We assume maybe he's sick, but then we find out, well, maybe there's a little something else to it. It's not just that he's sick at college, but that there's a break for some reason. I sat all morning in the college sickbay, counting bells, knelling classes to a close. At 2:00, our neighbors drove me home. In the porch, I met my father crying. He had always taken funerals in his stride. So it's a funeral, but this one's different. He had always taken funerals in his stride, and Big Jim Evans saying it was a hard blow. The baby cooed and laughed and rocked the pram when I came in, and I was embarrassed by old men standing up to shake my hand and tell me they were sorry for my trouble. The terrible formality of adult responses to serious life changes when you're a kid and you're used to being treated like a kid, but they're treating you suddenly like a member of the world when you least want them to. Whispers informed strangers I was the eldest, away at school, as my mother held my hand in hers and coughed out angry, tearless sighs. At 10 o'clock, the ambulance arrived with the corpse stanched and bandaged by the nurses. Next morning, I went up into the room. Snowdrops and candles soothed the bedside. I saw him for the first time in 6 weeks, paler now, wearing a poppy bruise on his left temple. He lay in the 4-foot box as in his cot. No gaudy scars. The bumper knocked him clear. A 4-foot box. A foot for every year. Yeah, just that it's spoken in a matter-of-fact way. If there's a suggestion of a sort of a loss, a death, a threat, a fear, then that ambiguity, here's one with just one glove, the other somewhere on the ground, that's potentially haunting. But I think here it just lingers in the air and we don't really see it resolved anywhere. We're home where I will go soon after. He I call my own regains his footing on the stairs and doesn't look back once. That is the way kids behave, but again, I think I'm left a little bit with a feeling of so what. He I call my own regains his footing, right? He I call my own is interesting because it suggests that there's a difference between, he doesn't say mine, the one who's mine, my kid, my son, but he I call my own. So maybe there's a suggestion that it is in some sense, this is not his kid. It's an adopted kid, a stepson, a son of another man somehow. Or is it just an excessively formal construction, right? It calls attention to itself, the formality of that construction. He I call my own. It calls attention to itself, but then we're not really rewarded for our attention. Yeah, so I think this is an attentive poem, a skillful poem. This is also incidentally a poet. I've seen some of his other work, which is very, very strong. So this is like a serious poet. But yeah, I think I'm left a little bit at a loss with this draft. All right, so this is The Swim by P, and I can already tell it's going to go way long. So I think this will end up being a double episode. And I will just do both on the main feed, just because, all right, why not? All right, so this is P. P is the letter. I realized that I shouldn't have chosen a letter that sounds like an unfortunate word. This is P's poem. The poem's called The Swim. The water tasted hard and thick, almost lashing against his gums. He spit and closed his mouth. His spittle dribbled down his chin. No lookout saw the paddling Athenian. In bone-white skin, his jawline shrunken, eyes afraid. His splashing masked his faithless cries. The splashes washed his spit. His prudence lost, he'd flown up higher than his father, crossed the gripping wind. His wings had melted in flame. He prayed some ship would come and make a claim. A ship came finally, so he screamed, all throat. The cedar rudder rested on the boat. The quick ship floated, fading unaware. His back to Samos slowing, he would dare to swim on. Torrid and gold, the moon then shone in gnarled gloom as it waxed. His guttural groan echoed his arms that pumped like wings. Waves dissolve more than we notice, even man's resolve. Or grasping breaths, near waves' slow brimming slam, Before his drowning, Icarus also swam. So, all right, this is a poem from the famous myth. Icarus and Daedalus fly from their imprisonment on Crete. They've been trapped by this is the story, right? Yeah. Daedalus, because Daedalus fled Athens because supposedly he murdered an apprentice. The story, I think, being that the apprentice's work had outshone Daedalus' work, and so in a jealous rage, he killed his own apprentice, and he fled from Athens to Crete, where King Minos employed him to. He was employed by Minos to do something, but then his first big invention was he actually built the white cow costume, the big wooden cow that Pasiphae climbed into so she could be impregnated by the big white bull. Who would think it was fucking a cow instead of the king's wife? And then once she got pregnant with the bull's monster baby, then Minos made Daedalus build a labyrinth and then imprisoned him in a tower with his son Icarus because, of course, he was the only one who knew the secret of the labyrinth. And he was in prison, so he could never tell. And maybe also for building the cow. Presumably Minos was not completely over that one. But then he eventually escaped. He built wings, and he and his son used the wings to fly out of the tower. He flew from Crete to Cumae, is that right? Because when Virgil goes to meet the Cumaean Sibyl, he finds Daedalus' temple to Apollo. That he built a golden temple to Apollo after making his escape. But of course, he built his wings out of feathers gathered from passing birds and wax. And Icarus flew too high, and his wax melted, and he sank into the sea. He fell into the sea and drowned. So this poem takes up a little moment from the myth that does not get a lot of attention, which is the moment between Icarus's plunge after he's fallen and his death. And the observation that the poem makes, and I would say it sort of makes it well in advance of the final line, which is a sentence, before his drowning, Icarus also swam. I would say by the time we get to that sentence, that's the thing we're very aware of, that's sort of what the whole poem has been. We've been watching Icarus swim before drowning. So I am left a little bit, at least with that final sentence, a little bit with a sense of so what in this poem as well. Just a few more notes going through it. This is one in which the rhymes are pretty true throughout, I think. Yeah, all but one is really true. Almost and closed. Almost is one of those words where either syllable can take a stress, kind of like I say umbrella, but Brian says umbrella, and if you're Rihanna, then you give it 4 syllables. But yeah, almost can be almost, depending on the placement. So that's fine. The water tasted hard and thick almost. I think I've used almost as a rhyme word. Lashing against his gums, he spit and closed. So that's what's called a voiced versus an unvoiced consonant. The S is unvoiced in almost, and it is voiced in closed. So a voiced S sounds like this, Z, and an unvoiced S sounds like this, S. When I was in college, I spent a weekend in Vienna with a girlfriend, and I was trying to teach myself German, and I read that the double S, which sort of gets a funny little squiggle that looks kind of like a B in German text, I read that the double S is unvoiced. I didn't understand. I thought that unvoiced meant unspoken, like silent. And so then I kept trying to say words that had double S's in them, but I would just exclude the sound of the double S, which rendered my German completely incomprehensible. But yeah, in this case, it is a little, it's the very first. It's a poem of couplets. The very first couplet is the only couplet with a slant rhyme, and it is a very slight slant rhyme, but it is there for whatever that's worth. That doesn't seem like a huge deal. The meter is fairly sturdy with this possible. The second couplet, his mouth, his spittle dribbled down his chin. Yeah, that's fairly straight ahead. No lookout saw the paddling Athenian. It's a little bit of a funny moment, and because if that is a final stress, if that chin is meant to rhyme with N, which again, depending on your regional pronunciation, that's another potential slant rhyme. It's also just I would say the meter there is a little wobbly. It's not an especially clean couplet, but that's okay. Not every couplet needs to be clean. It's just an observation, just a technical observation. Not every couplet needs to be clean. Not every rhyme needs to chime out. Just things that caught my ear as I was listening. What stood out much more than that, though, was spit. Yeah, I had this conversation with Cameron about a submitted poem recently. Not this one, totally different poem. He spit. It is possible to use spit as the past tense of spit, to spit, and he spit yesterday. But of course, at least in my mind, I always have to do a little micro adjustment when I hear that. He spat. Oh, past. Okay, yeah. The problem, of course, is that spat, as with you get the same trouble with shit and shat, right? The problem with spat, and with shat even more so than with spat, but with both of them, is that they just don't sound totally natural. We don't use them that frequently, and so unless you have a very specific voice or era that the speech is taking place in, then spat and shat can sound a little funny, and then you run into this trouble of having to settle for using spit to mean the past tense of spit, which just, again, in my mind, it causes a little, it's like the refraction that happens when you put a straw into a cup of water. It's just a little jog, a little like, right. But again, it's just a little bit of heat escapes from the machine that way. So, is it a big deal? No, it's just a thing that is there. His spittle dribbled down his chin. No lookout saw the paddling Athenian. In bone white skin, his jawline shrunken. I don't know what jawline shrunken means. Unless it's like a broken jaw, where the bone, the muscle is retracted. The bone. I don't know what a shrunken jawline is. I just don't know what that means. Faithless cries feels funny because, like, what comes to mind is the image of Peter sinking into the water because he lacks faith in Jesus, and Jesus says, well, if you have faith, then you don't sink. You can walk on water if you believe. Just bizarre, I have to say. I mean, I love Jesus. Jesus is great, funny, interesting, smart guy. That's a bizarre moment. I don't like the Jesus emphasis on faith above everything. I just, not everything. He doesn't place it above everything. But boy, faith seems really, really crucial to Jesus in a way that I just think is it's hard. Yeah, I don't get that one. I don't get that one. You fucking idiot, Peter, sinking into this lake. What a lazy bitch you are. Why would you lack faith that you can walk on water? What a weird thing to rant at a guy about. Like, what a weird bone to pick. But like, that's what comes to mind when you show me a drowning guy who's crying out faithlessly. I think, well, faithless, generally speaking, when we bother to say somebody is faithless, what that tends to mean is that somebody is untrustworthy. Somebody is like La Casada Infiel, the Lorca poem, the faithless wife. Like you're betraying your spouse, or you're acting in bad faith. You are not keeping the faith with your, with those who've confided in you. Faithless cries in this case, if it's like Jesus, like he lacks faith, then I guess Icarus lacks faith in a god. So he lacks faith in Apollo, but that's not his problem. His problem wasn't that he lacked faith in a god. It was that he had too much faith in himself, right? So faithless just seems like an odd word choice there. His prudence lost. I noticed a lot of toward the ends of these lines, and I think it does sometimes happen when you struggle with getting the rhymes to work. A lot of the ending phrases of these lines feel either redundant or a little bit forced. The splashes washed his spit, his prudence lost. He'd flown up higher than his father. Well, I don't think your prudence is something you lose exactly. But the failure to show prudence is kind of like the heart of this myth. It's like the one thing, don't fly too high. That's kind of the thing we take away. You be prudent, don't be prideful. Those are kind of the double-edged moral of the story. So even bothering to say he lacked prudence when you are already saying he flew too high, he flew higher than his father, seems a little redundant. And then lost just seems like an odd word to pair with prudence there. You lose your prudence, or you fail to show prudence. I don't know. It just sounds a little, again, I'm just having to do these little mental jogs to try to, follow the lines. His wings had melted in flame. Of course, they did not melt in flame. If they had been exposed to flame, they would have caught fire and burned up, right? But they didn't. They melted in the heat of the sun. So that's a place where it does feel like there's both sides of that couplet seem like they're struggling to find the rhyme. His wings had melted in flame. He prayed some ship would come and make a claim. That's not really what he wanted. He wanted the ship to throw him a rope or let down a ladder, or some sailors to jump in and grab him. He prayed some ship would come and make a claim. That sounds like it's going to stake a claim on an island, like plant a flag. Again, it just feels like you're sort of you're trying to get the rhymes to line up, and the sense of the denotative sense is secondary to the sonic order there. Similarly, the next two lines: a ship came finally, so he screamed, all throat. Well, isn't that kind of what a scream is, right? You're all throat. Then he screamed, all nose. That would be an odd scream, right? So you probably don't need all throat, right? He screamed that's the same information. We don't get any more information when we hear all throat. The cedar rudder rested on the boat. That's an interesting one, because it took me a second to reread that line, and I realized it's because the information is all perfectly fine. What I like about it is that the tone of Icarus's experience is one of extreme urgency, right? He's screaming. He's in the most extreme condition imaginable. He's drowning and he is crying out for any help. And then I like the reserve and sort of flat, bored tone of the sentence that follows. This is, again, the Auden sentiment from Musée des Beaux-Arts. The cedar rudder rested on the boat. For the people in the boat, it's just another day. The trouble with that line, apart from cedar rudder, which just seems like a little bit of kind of infelicitous assonance there, not assonance, consonants. Well, actually, yeah, it's sort of like a cedar rudder is consonant, but it's the unstressed syllable der is a matches perfectly, but the stressed syllable seed and rud don't. But yeah, it's like a funny little kind of marble-mouthed near rhyme right at the beginning of the line. The cedar rudder, which sort of sounds kind of funny, and it takes a little extra energy to get past. The cedar rudder rested on the boat. The problem, again, this is the Tom Stoppard says that I don't think he's totally right, but his rule of thumb is he says dialogue in a play should sound just like dialogue in real life, except that the most important part should always come last. You build up to the big reveal. The important part of the sentence comes at the end. That's how we know it's the important part. That's the operative part. The beginning part of the sentence is all the stuff we already know. The end of the sentence is the new information. But we've done the opposite here, right? The cedar rudder rested on the boat. Well, the rudder is on the boat already, right? Like the cedar rudder rested on the boat sounds like the operative information is that the rudder stayed on the boat. I mean, I guess maybe they could be reaching the rudder out to him, but presumably they would be reaching an oar out to him, not the rudder. What he wants is for the rudder not to rest. He wants the rudder to turn, because that would mean the boat is turning, and that would mean it's coming to save him, to rescue him. He wants to see the rudder turn, because then the boat will turn. But the cedar rudder rested. The rested is actually the operative information. On the boat is both filler, because we already know it's a boat because it's a rudder, and it's making the rhyme It's filling out the line with information that we already have in order to make the rhyme land. So again, it's not a mortal sin, but it's just a little infelicity. And it slightly muddled the sense for me because I was looking to the end of the line for the new information, and I missed it because the new information came in the middle of the line, which is that the rudder is not turning. The rudder is staying put. And again, rested, maybe part of it is that rested is not quite the right word for what a rudder is doing when it's not changing course. It stays true. It stays straight. It's not really resting. It's doing its job. It's just not turning. Similarly, the quick ship floated. The quick ship floated, fading unaware. So fading unaware is terrible news for him. There's nothing wrong with that coming at the end of the line. But the quick ship floated, right? If that's the sentence, then we get that floated comes at the end of that little independent clause, the quick ship floated. But the floated is the obvious thing the boat does. It floated because it's a boat. Whatever floats your boat, like boats float. We already know it's floating. The thing we weren't sure about is it's quick, right? And then it's fading unaware. So again, because of the construction of the sentence, we are led to think it is saying something slightly other than what it's saying, right? That it floated is not news. That it's quick and that it's already fading. And then, worst of all, it seems not even to know. So again, it's not that like this is a wrong sentence or this is terrible or this is bad. It's just that if I were reading this as my own sentence in a poem, I would say, you know what, the structural emphasis is a little bit wonky there. It sort of leads me to think in the wrong direction there. I do, by the way, I'm a big believer in Kenneth Lonergan's rule of thumb, which is you don't keep revising until there's nothing wrong with it. You just keep revising until you can't make it any better. So I think sometimes when my wife gives me a piece of writing of hers and then I give her some notes on it, she'll say like, oh, do you just want me to do it? I thought I was closer. You want me to do all this terrible work. You think everything's wrong with it. And my point is, no, I don't think everything's wrong with it. I don't even think you need to like change all the things I pointed at. I'm just pointing at the things I noticed. Right? That's my value as an editor. I'm not bad at making suggestions. Like what I'm not doing in this episode is trying to fix things. I'm just making observations about what's there. Because that's the first thing I would do. And like for me, like the first round is what's there, what is worth fixing. Right? And it's not just a matter of how many things are wrong with it. It's a matter of, despite how many things are wrong with it, what is it worth overall, right? So I know it sounds like I'm pointing out a lot of stuff here, but I'm just trying to observe how the way I observe poems at like a dumb technical level when I'm trying to figure out what about them is worth keeping in my own work. His back to Samos slowing, he would dare to swim on. So that's a line break and a stanza break. He would dare to swim on. When you break something over, when you break like a clause or a sentence over a line, it's just worth asking yourself, particularly when it's mid-phrase, when we have to wait to find out what it is he would dare until after the stanza break. You're putting a special emphasis on it. And I don't think that's an unanswered emphasis here. I think the thing that's answered here is if we're waiting for a big shocker, a big surprise, we're not going to get it because what he would dare to do is to swim on. And maybe what that's emphasizing is just the monotony of this task. Oh my God, more swimming. Holy shit, there can't possibly be more swimming. And now what is there? There's more swimming. But it is, it's an expectation you raise there. And you answer it by saying, now you guess what you have to do. More swimming, motherfucker. Torrid and gold, the moon then shone in gnarled gloom. It does start to feel a little bit like we're being in a poem here. Like we're kind of self-consciously being in a poem where part of it is just the moon. What's the Larkin line? There has been too much moonlight and self-pity. It's tough. It's not that you can't write poems about the moon. It's just that when you bring in the moon and a beautiful description of the moon, sometimes we feel like, oh, are we being in a poem now? His guttural groan, I think every groan is guttural, so it does feel redundant there. Echoed his arms that pumped like wings. I kind of like that. I kind of like that his wings are His arms are pumping, and of course, like the wings, like it's great because he's swimming and he's pumping his arms like wings. And when in a different context, that might sound like good news. Like he swims as like the penguin swims through the water, like the seagull swims through the air. It's like an expression of grace. But in Icarus's case, it's really bad news. Hey man, you swim as well as you fly. Fucking loser, you're going down. So I kind of like that. Echoed his arms that pumped like wings. Waves dissolve more than we notice. Oh? I don't know what that means. Waves dissolve more than we notice. Even man's resolve. I don't know about that. Like, if the waves dissolve his resolve. I mean, it just feels like he's getting exhausted swimming in the ocean, and that's brutal. And, like, any man would be worn out after a time swimming in the open ocean with no end in sight. So it just seems like it's sort of it's overly explained, or it's something too lofty about that. Waves dissolve more than we notice, even man's resolve. Like, it's not a surprise that he's getting exhausted. It's a surprise that he's losing his will. Like, it's a shock that he's had the will to keep swimming after plunging that far from the heavens. So it feels like a little bit of an odd statement to insert here right toward the end. Waves dissolve more than we notice, even man's resolve or grasping breaths. I like the grasping breaths, right? Because we hear gasping breaths in that, but it's also the sound of him. He's reaching. He's grasping. He's trying to struggling to catch the air. Just he's trying to struggle to catch the waves. So that's a nice little touch. Grasping breaths is nice. Near waves, slow brimming slam. That one is interesting, and I don't know if it quite works. Near waves, slow brimming slam. It has a kind of a, like, if what this is saying is near, if the near is describing the waves, not that he's near the waves, but that the waves are near, and he's making a statement about near waves, slow brimming slam. The waves are nearby and they're slowly building up and brimming. I like the image of the waves brimming, sort of slowly filling up to their maximum capacity before cracking down on your head. Then there's a nice mimesis in that construction, even in the slight momentary incoherence of it. It takes us a second to understand the syntax there, but by the time we get it, we're feeling the impact of the wave on our face. So that's kind of a nice little moment of slight syntactical struggle, but there does seem to be, in the literal sense, I have a little trouble, something between, maybe it's near waves, slow brimming slam. Is that new information? Is that specifying a type of wave that does this, or is it just the waves, slow brimming slam? Is this just what the waves are doing as you're swimming under them and they're getting the better of you bit by bit? And then, before his drowning, Icarus also swam. You're telling us precisely what we already know. By this point, we're totally with you. We get it. We know where we are. We know who we're dealing with. And you're just summarizing the thing we already know. And so then I wonder, like, well, wait, why are we doing this? It's like a more, well, I won't say a more depressing version of The Secret Miracle. The Secret Miracle is like an incredibly depressing story that is supposed to end on a happy note. So I don't find it happy at all. The guy who's the novelist who gets to finish his unfinished novel because the bullets that are racing toward him after the firing squad fired freeze in the air for an indefinite period of time, and he sits there and is can count himself the king of infinite space by just being frozen in time and thinking through all of the details of his novel until he's finally finished it, and then he completes it, and then the bullets strike home and he dies, and like nobody ever reads the fucking novel. So what were we doing all this for? You don't write novels to finish them in your own head. Like, what? That's horrible. But is this a little bit The Secret Miracle? Like Icarus had this struggle that nobody knows about that doesn't make any difference to the bottom line of the story, but it's still a true experience he had. It's like a promising concept, but it doesn't feel like it quite is completed as a concept. All right, I'm going to knock out one more of these, and then maybe I'll save the next three, because there's six I know I want to talk about. So maybe I'll do one more and then call it, and then I'll do the next three. Maybe I'll try to do them tomorrow night. So this is going to be a late episode. It's coming out basically like These episodes have been coming out late in the week, and I know this will be coming out almost in the beginning of the following week. But don't worry, you'll get your SLEERICKETS worth. I have a really, really juicy conversation with Ethan. I'm going to be putting out later on in this coming week. But I think what I'll do is I'll do one more. This one is going to be a fairly short one, not because it's not a sophisticated poem, but because it is perhaps too sophisticated for me. So I'm going to do one more poem here, and then break off, and we'll do 3 more in the next installment. And I think I will just put both installments on the main feed this go round. All right, this last one is by, did I assign a letter to this one? I'm going to call this one S. Okay, so this is S's poem. Wait, what do I have? I have the first one was T, and then P, and this is S, and then the other 3 are, I have no overlaps. All right, so this one will be S. This is the title is an exemplar of eclecticism, and that's in quotation marks. An exemplar of eclecticism, and then there's a note underneath it that says the guidebook said of the Basilica of St. Anthony of Padua. So there's a Basilica of St. Anthony in Padua, and the guidebook says this basilica is an exemplar of eclecticism. And the poem seems to sort of take up that as a kind of theme. So it's written as in quatrains that have a little bit of a loose sort of ABAB, sort of AAAA rhyme scheme, depending on how you mark it. All of the lines in each quatrain rhyme consonantly, and then some of them also are true rhyme, but the true rhymes fall a little more irregularly, which is fine, which is totally fine. But that's notice that. So the other thing though is that the lines are broken visually into something that looks like Anglo-Saxon hemistichs. So you have a little white space in the middle of each line. So it looks like you have one half of the line on the left and another half on the right. In Anglo-Saxon hemistichs, these halves are broken or are linked by alliteration. And there is a lot of alliteration in this poem, but it does not seem consistently to link the two halves of the lines together. So it works a little differently. And as you will very, very quickly hear, this is a poem that does not use conventional sentence structure, but it's also not a poem that's nonsense, right? It's definitely not nonsense. It is talking about something specific. It is a response to the Basilica of St. Anthony of Padua. It is legible, but it does not consist of any sentences as we understand them. And a lot of the words are typographically smushed together so that they're kind of turned into compound words. So this is, I will say, a poem after Cameron's own heart. This is by S. This is an exemplar of eclecticism with the note, the guidebook said, of the Basilica of St. Anthony of Padua. Romanesque red brick, screen facade, Byzantine bubble domes, clamber clash collide, steam whistle minarets, Goth arcade, Jubilee holy door, detour side, tight-packed pilgrims, polyglot prayer, reverent river jam, dumbstruck adore, hushed glossolalia, murmur mob stir, gold gasp sibilance, pamphlet slithered floor, underfoot patchwork marvel grid, barber pole prayer rug fugue overhead, razzle-dazzle rib vault volume void, apse cavern gloom gold bumbershoot spread, crowd blocked crowd scenes bas relief baroque, can't see barely breathe touch tomb trek, reliquary lamp flame preacher tongue of black, jeweled monstranced jawbone, blech, lost things patron, clutter hoard feel, opulent ornaments, plain plank kneel, saint card fresco house, siege-proof wall, doubt undeniable, wonder real. And I should say, most of the lines are broken into kind of two halves with two words on the left part of the line and two words on the right part and a white space in the middle. But that is not true of all of them. And some of them, it's one on the left, three on the right, and there's two spaces in one of them. And so it's not totally consistent. And as I said, a lot of these are compound words that are not sort of neologisms. Nonce compound words. I think nonce is better than neologism because there are compound words that are meant to be taken up and used more broadly, but then there are also compound words that are meant to be used sort of just the once. Yeah, which is how these largely feel. As I said, poem after Cameron's heart. I think so. Stepping back from the premise of the exercise for a moment, if this were, say, to come into the slush pile, I would do what I do anyway, which is forward it to Cameron without comment, because I do that with all the poems. But I would sort of forward it to him without comment, and I would be kind of waiting to hear his take. Because if his response was, who cares, then I would just reject it. If his response was, oh my God, this is brilliant, then I would really give it another read and try to take more time with it. Because this is so much not my thing. Which is not to say that it is not a thing, but it is something I feel it does not arouse my sympathies. And I think it's really because there's no voice. There is a voice in the find your voice as a poet. There's a voice of the poet in this poem, but there's not a voice of the speaker of the poem in this poem. There is no speaker. There is an implied experience or perspective. And the moments in the poem where I most enjoy it are the moments where the implied perspective of the speaker most comes through. Pamphlet slithered, which is nice because there's a little bit that's one of the neologisms that I find not annoying. I tend to just generally find neologisms annoying. If I don't find it annoying, I mean, again, it's like what's the rubber print Warren, experiment is an elite word for failure. If you have to say, oh, it's a neologism, then that's probably didn't work, right? Like if a neologism really works, we just hear it and we say like, of course, right? That's the experience you have when you read. Not all of the words, but many of the words in Jabberwocky that have since become words, right? Like chortled. You heard chortled and you thought like, oh, that's it. That's a word, right? If you have to bother to call it a neologism or a noncegism, that sounds worse, a nonce word, then, it might not have landed. Pamphlet slithered is really nice, I think, because it does a couple of things. So one is that pamphlets littered is what initially came to mind, which is only one letter off, right? Pamphlets littered. The floor is littered with pamphlets. But the experience, of course, is you're walking into a room. It's presumably these are marble floors or stone floors. They're covered in pamphlets. You step on them and you slide a little bit. And all that paper sliding together makes this sort of shuffling sound, and it is this vague, unnerving feeling of slithering. Something is slipping and slithering under your feet, and you look down and you realize, oh, there are pamphlets all over the floor. So it is a moment that sort of it only makes sense. This is what when I really like descriptions, is when it only makes sense given the premise that a human is experiencing it. Right? An AI can't come up with this description. I mean, maybe an AI wrote this poem. I hope. Tell me you didn't submit an AI poem. But it works as a description because a human being could have that experience. Maybe not precisely the way I just described it, but that's what came to mind when I read it. I also like blocked crowd scenes. It initially is dumber than it I think it really is. Once I read it and then I took a second. Again, this is a poem. If you want an effortless reading experience, which I do, and I can hear some of you naying at that. I do think that as a writer, I want to provide the reader with an effortless experience. I then want it to be possible for him to get more if he puts some effort in, but I want an effortless experience to be available to him. No effortless experience is available in reading this poem, at least not to me. So we're not even really talking about like heat coming out of the machine anymore. I'm not sure how much heat the machine delivers. This is maybe a totally different kind of machine. But I read crowd block crowd scenes and it felt dull. But then I thought, well, wait, all right, she's repeating this crowd. She's calling attention to repeating this construction, crowd blocked crowd scenes. And of course, this is an experience that's very familiar from going to visit famous old Renaissance or medieval sites in the old world. Is you're looking at a big stained glass window or painting or fresco or mosaic of a bunch of people all together. You go to try to see the School of Athens in Rome. I think it's in Rome. Is School of Athens, is that in Rome? The Raphael painting. Is that the Sistine Chapel? Fuck, where's the Raphael School of Athens? It's a big crowd scene. It's like tons of people. It's really cool and overwhelming, but you're also in a room filled with tons of people and you can't see the crowd on the painting because you're too busy seeing the crowd all around you. It is in the Vatican City. Yeah. It's called the Room of Raphael in the Apostolic Palace in Vatican City. Yeah, I'll say correct. Okay, so Rome, I guess the Vatican City is not quite Rome exactly. American Pope. Whew. I don't know. Got to say it worries me a little bit. Worries me, but who needs my opinion on the Pope? Preacher tongue struck me as wrong. Maybe because I am Catholic. Maybe because this is a Catholic basilica. Maybe because even the same line includes the word reliquary, which seems like so super Catholic. Preacher is not. We don't have preachers. Catholics don't have preachers. It's not quite right. It's almost, but not quite right. Quite it. Like we have homilies. We have sermons, we have preaching, but we don't have preachers. Preacher tongue, we're in a different kind of church there. We're preacher tongue of black, and we're looking at the reliquary, so we're looking at like the dead. This is St. Anthony's corpse we're looking at. Preacher tongue of black, or some parts of his body left over. Preacher tongue of black. Yeah, no, he's not a preacher. He's a saint, he's a martyr, he's a whatever, he's not a preacher. Preacher tongue of black, we're in a Pentecostal church there, not a Catholic church. What's the line? So we have preacher tongue of black, jeweled, monstranced jawbone. Monstrance, super Catholic. Catholic, not Protestant, not denominational, not evangelical, not Pentecostal, Catholic. No preachers. Jeweled, monstranced jawbone, black. So the black is in parentheses. There are a few parentheses throughout the poem. They don't seem totally necessary to me. But in this case, it's the word blech is set off in parentheses. Blech being an expression of disgust. That feels to me, just the register feels different than the rest of the poem. It just feels like a different, like there's an insertion of a kind of a voice there in a poem that feels like we haven't been in that kind of poem. So again, that's not to say good, bad, or otherwise. It's just that my experience in that moment is it throws me a little bit. Granted, I spend most of the poem thrown anyway, but it seems like there is a different game being played with the word blech there than is being played in the lines preceding it. Lost Things patrons, Clutter Horde feel similarly. Clutter Horde feel. Like, is that actually more information than we got from Clutter Horde? Feel, maybe, you know what it is feel may seem a little bit slangy. By slangy, I don't mean improper. I mean, it feels like it's going to be dated. Like the way we use feel today as a noun in this particular context. Not this context isn't like an ancient Catholic church, but like the way we use feel to talk about whether it's, the mouth feel or, he's got that feel. I mean, it seems like the way we use vibes, like it's going to feel dated soon. It's going to be like when you read a Robert Haas poem and he's speaking really beautifully. He's trying to write a beautiful love poem and he talks about, I love to ball you, baby. And you're like, like it's gonna land funny to us in a few years. So yeah, I think feel seems like it doesn't add new information and it may be not quite the right voice there. Opulent ornaments. Opulent ornaments is like, that feels like, again, that's like Icarus also swam. Like, yeah, man, that's what we've been talking about this whole fucking time. Opulent ornaments, that goes without saying. Plain plank meal, saint card, fresco house, siege-proof wall, doubt undeniable, wonder real. So, doubt undeniable, wonder real. My suspicion is that is going to land a lot harder, not just for people who are more at home in sort of, like broken and experimental syntax, but also people who are more at home in religious faith. Doubt undeniable, wonder real. It strikes my ear as a little bit sentimental, but I think it's because it's the kind of religious sentiment that I would have accepted enthusiastically once upon a time. So I think my primary response to this poem, which is really, again, sort of breaking from the convention of the exercise, is that this is a poem that is not for me, but it is for some people. But yeah, it's harder for me to have smart things to say. This is where, and I will say, Cameron has already joked with me about not getting to do this. Alice has said she'd be up for helping do some version of this in the future. I would like to do more of these. I hope this is helpful to you. Maybe you're listening to this and you think like, holy shit, this is terrible. In which case, if you really think that, you probably aren't still listening. But like, if this seems like it is to some extent useful to some of you, I would like to do more of this in the future. And maybe it would be good to bring in some people who are not me because they would have some other things to say. I think I'm also realizing how fucking long it takes me to do these. So maybe we'll time them out differently. But I'm going to call this one here, and I'm going to try to record a whole nother set of 3 more tomorrow, because I am overdue. We have 3 juicy ones tomorrow. These were juicy too, but these will be juicy in a different way. So thank you especially to everybody who sent in poems, and I hope I was not more of an asshole. I was talking to a listener the other day who was like, basically she said, like, in really polite terms, she was like, I think people know you're an asshole. They were like, I don't think people will be surprised by how you talk about the poems because I think they know how you talk about poems. So I hope I was not, I hope I was not more of an asshole than you expected. But thank you for sending those in. I'm very grateful. I would like to do this some more in the future. I will do another one tomorrow night, if I am able. And sorry this is coming out so late, but thank you for listening. You can reach me, as always, at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com, and with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.